Hello again. I'm James. I'm an actor and a magician and a friend of Bict's. Welcome to my magic workshops that I'm doing as part of Bict and Friends at Home. Each week I'm teaching you a magic trick with things that you can find around your own home. This week all you need is some paper and a pen and maybe a pencil and an eraser. I'll show you the trick, then I'll teach you the secret behind it so you can do it too. And then I'll share some tips about how you can be a better magician and a better performer. This week, I have an acting idea that will help you think about your character as a magician. What kind of magician am I? What kind of magic powers do I have? But before we get to that, the trick for week 3, the case of the curious Q. And this time, I need your help. This is the curious Q. It looks like a big letter Q, but it's made up of lots of symbols. It starts down here at the bottom with the circle. Take your finger and point at the circle. And now think of a number between 10 and 30. You're going to count your number around the Q. Start counting with the symbol that your finger is on now. So that's the circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you get to the star, turn left and keep counting clockwise around the Q. That was 5. So that's 6, 7. You're going to keep counting in a circle. If you pass the star, ignore the tail and just keep going in a circle. When you get to your number, stop, but keep your finger on the symbol that you arrive at. That was 7, 8, 9, 10. And when you get to your number, stop. Keep your finger there. Now you're going to count to your number again, but in the opposite direction, travelling anti-clockwise or counterclockwise around the Q. Remember, start counting from 1 with the symbol that your finger is on now. So if you stopped on the wavy lines, you'd start counting from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and count this way. When you get to your number, stop, but keep your finger on the symbol that you arrive at. Are you there? Good. Now don't move your finger. I have no idea what number you thought of to begin with, and I have no idea how many times you've counted round the Q. But I do have the funny feeling that right now your finger is on the square. The curious Q. You might have guessed, but like week 1, when we teleported M&Ms, this trick works automatically. Or it does if your Q looks the same as mine. It's important that you have the same number of symbols. So before we look at why it works, let me show you how you can draw your own curious Q so it's laid out just like this one. Now remember, I said the number of symbols is important. And in my Q, I have a ring of 12 symbols, like a clock face, and another 4 symbols down here, which make up the tail, and they're connected to where 5 o'clock would be. Actually, it looks like this. A ring of 12, with a symbol at each number, and then another 4 down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, connected to 5. So this is a good way to remember it. And in fact, you could use any symbols that you wanted to. But for now, let's use the same ones that I used earlier. And we'll copy this one. You just need a piece of paper and a marker pen, something to draw the symbols with. Actually, when I did this, I also sketched it in first with a pencil so I could make sure everything was evenly spaced, and then I rubbed out my pencil marks afterwards with an eraser. So let me show you how I did that. The first thing I did was draw a circle where my 12 symbols are going to be. So I want a nice big circle, and then I'm going to mark in at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, top, bottom, left and right, and then 2 more in each of these spaces. That's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. That just makes sure there's space for each of the symbols. And then I want 4 more in a curly tail coming off where 5 o'clock would be. So I need space for another 1, 2, 3, 4 symbols. That looks good. So I'm going to draw 1 symbol in each of these little circles, and I'm going to copy the same ones that I did earlier. So starting at the top, at 12 o'clock, I have a curly spiral. Then at 1 o'clock, there's a square. At 2 o'clock, there's a triangle. There's a cross at 3, a circle at 4. I've already got a circle. A 5-pointed star at 5. 3 wavy lines at 6, an hourglass at 7, another spiral at 8, another star at 9, 3 wavy lines at 10, an hourglass at 11, and down in the tail there's a square, a triangle, a cross, and a circle. Now that I've drawn all my symbols in with a pen, I can use the eraser to rub out all those pencil marks carefully, like this, and when I'm finished, I'll just have the symbols left in the correct pattern to do the trick, just like I showed you earlier. That's the tail done already. So if I rub out the rest of the pencil marks, it will look exactly like this one. Now I said you don't have to use the same symbols. You could use any symbols that you wanted. You could draw pictures of houses and trees and cats if you wanted to use pictures, or if you have coloured pens and pencils, how about this? You could use coloured dots instead. The same idea, you start here, they count round one way, count back the same number the other, and with this, they would end up on the blue spot. How do I know that? Well, if you use the same pattern, they will always end up at whatever is at 1 o'clock. So at 1 o'clock on this, it's the blue spot. At 1 o'clock here, there's the square. That's why we ended at the square earlier. You could even combine these ideas and use shapes and colours and do something like this. Wow, look. So with this one, if you end up at 1 o'clock, they're going to end up on the blue square. But you could do anything, use your imagination, as long as you have a ring of 12 symbols and 4 extra ones in the tail connected to 5 o'clock, this will always work and they'll always end at 1 o'clock. But why do you always end up at 1 o'clock? Well, I think it's easier to see why if we go back to this picture of the curious Q with numbers instead of symbols. Remember in the trick, you could think of any number bigger than about 10. So let's use 10 as an example. We'll start counting at the bottom, and this time it's easy because we just follow the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then you ask them to count to the same number, but going back the other way. Let's see what would happen if I count back down the tail of the Q. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I get back to where I started from. Well, that's just because I've counted 10 in one direction and then 10 back the other way, the same number, so of course I get back to where I started. That would happen with any number. I could count 20 and 20, or 100 and 100. As long as I count the same number forwards and backwards, I'll always get back to the start. The secret in the curious Q is that you don't ask them to count back where they came from, down the tail of the Q, they keep counting around the circle. So the last 4 numbers they count won't be here, 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 and here. They'll be here, 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 and here, and that's why you always get back to 1 o'clock. With numbers, it's actually very easy to see that it's the same distance from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, to the beginning of the tail, as it is from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, to 1 o'clock. Because it's easier to see with numbers, I suggest you don't use numbers in your curious Q. Like we talked about earlier, you could use symbols or colours or pictures or names. Just don't use numbers because that actually helps explain why this works. Now, as long as they follow your instructions, they will always end up at 1 o'clock. And this is called a force. People feel like they have a free choice. They have a free choice of number, and it feels like that means they have a free choice of symbol. If I'd chosen a different number, I'd have ended up with a different symbol. That's the sneaky bit. No, with the way the curious Q works, it doesn't matter which number you choose, you'll always end up in the same place. And that's called a force in magic. And when you have a force, you know, the magician knows ahead of time what will happen, and that means you can make a prediction. My prediction was the black square I had stuck on the back of my clipboard. But anything which shows you knew before what would happen is a good prediction. So you could draw a square on the back of your curious Q. You could even write, "You will end up on the square," on a piece of paper and leave it writing side down on the table. Anything that shows you knew in advance makes a good prediction. One other thing about involving audience members in your magic. It's always nice to involve people from the audience in magic and they feel like they're part of it, but it's usually important that they understand exactly what you want them to do, that you give very clear instructions, because if they don't do exactly what you ask, often the trick doesn't work. So for example, in the curious Q, when I demonstrated it, I was very careful about saying, when you start counting at 1 on the symbol that your finger is on now. And I even demonstrated 1, 2, 3, 4. Because if they count in a slightly different way, then they'll end up in the wrong place. So think about your script and think about how you can give clear instructions to your audience, especially when you're going to predict something using a force. Time for another performing tip. Actually, we've already had one today. If you're going to involve members of your audience, make sure you give them really clear instructions. If you need any help with that, you can always look back at my performance earlier for ideas. But I wanted to talk to you about something else today, a piece of actors' magic. Actors use something called the magic if as a way to start their imaginations, and it works like this. If this were real, what would it be like? As a magician, you might ask, if I could really do magic, what kind of magic could I do? Or, if I could really do magic, how would I make the magic happen? If you think back to week 1 when we made M&Ms magically travel around, I answered that question, how could I make it happen, by wiggling my fingers at the 2 piles. That's what we needed to do to make one of the M&Ms magically travel. But I could have chosen to do something else. Maybe to make the M&M teleport, I have to click my fingers. Or maybe I hold my hands over the 2 piles mysteriously for a moment until I can sense that one of the M&Ms has travelled across. Yes, it's happened. So think about what it would look like and how you could make it happen if you really could do magic. Tricks which use a force often give you a choice as well. Today, I chose to present the curious Q as a prediction. I knew before it happened that you would end up on the square. It was like I had the power to see into the future somehow. But I could have presented it in a different way. I could have said that actually I can see what you're thinking. I can read your mind. So instead of having the black square taped to the back of my clipboard, I could have waited until you'd finished counting and then said, concentrate on the shape that you've arrived at, and I'm going to see into your mind. Ah, yes, you're thinking of a shape made of straight lines and sharp corners. You're thinking of a square. So by adding some acting and by choosing what I can do, can I see into the future? Can I see into your mind? You can choose what kind of effect you can do as a magician. So start thinking about, if you could do magic, what would it be like? And use the actor's magic if to start your imagination. Have fun with the Curious Q, and I'll see you next time on James Magic. before I go, I hope you're enjoying these tips and tricks and that you try them for yourself at home. If you do, Bict and I would love to see it. Why not record your magic and send a clip to Bict? Just record it on your phone and email it to bictfest@gmail.com. I can't wait to see what you do. Bye for now.